Okay, two quick reflections, which hopefully are of sufficient profundity that they can't be quickly exhausted like the dew in the morning. The first one on some commentary which is said somehow in praise of Zizek, and the second on a crucial concept in Heidegger. The first one, I've been thinking about this repeated refrain. For instance, the last time I heard it was from Cornel West. This praise of Zizek, which runs, Zizek takes a position. He doesn't put scare quotes around everything like French theory of a certain day in the 90s or so, let's say. This also somehow tilts towards the notion that Zizek, Cornel West also says, what I like about you, brother, is you're in the world but not of it. This somehow implies the distinction, which I think is a problem which has been raging across the divide since around the year 1900, as Arnold Brecht puts it. And this is a year which sort of slices through the early youth of Heidegger, and is still somehow remembered at the foot of Leo Strauss. And also it's interesting to note that Leo Lowith, who was a very much a favored student of Heidegger's, said that he can't quite get on the program with Heidegger because he took up Nietzsche as mother's milk. There's something of that with Strauss, except the famous break at age 30 with Strauss. It's also, I didn't know, but I read in a really excellent article by the guy that, I forget his name, but the guy that wrote a book on Strauss and Strauss and Carl Schmitt. Meyer, possibly is his name. He says also Strauss was a Zionist until age 30. So there must have been some kind of Pauline moment for Strauss where he threw everything off. And I think this, in a way, should make us think of the Nietzschean moment, which we could understand as, or we could illustrate by thinking of the difference between ordinary resentment, which, like anger, can motivate and give people a life force, an energy to do things, and therefore it can be channeled in the right way, and this so-called ressentiment. Ressentiment means, in this case, that moment where Strauss threw off his past, where he was the same as his generation, as it were, and made a free Übermensch punctum, made a impress of the the whole press, the middle whole press. He made his own position there. This is the position that Nietzsche says here. If somebody genuinely has a whole press like this, which is in a way to establish the tablet of values, as it were, and to present something that's like a monument, which can then be a monument only in the sense of the Nietzsche's three forms of history. There's some history which stand in a way which they can guide, in which they can be something which, like a great form of art, one can try to set one's rudder by, as it were, set one's course by. in this sense, when one has resentment against the highest, against a punctum like that, this is what Nietzsche is against, because those are that's what carries life forward. That's what gives life its modus, its time, its tempor. So, in that sense, one can see that Strauss has broken from Nietzsche, but yet somehow we see him through this refractory light, this Nietzschean light, because it was so powerful in that time period, just as it was for Heidegger in a different way, who was involved in that wrestling with Angel and Nietzsche for so many years. So what I want to say for this first Zizek point is that the claim that Zizek takes a position rather than is open and exposed to all these other forces doesn't make sense, even in the simplest case where you say either you're for or against something, and you can't put scare quotes on it and say we can't quite understand what it's all about. For one thing, Zizek himself is constantly doing that when he speaks of the false dichotomy and he wants a third option and so on. But for another thing, I think more importantly, the confused and the position which is a sort of a rodent going in, with its face twitching and its little feelers out and going on all, smelling for the its food wherever it can find it, famine or feast. This is a position, and it's, in a way, it's not even a position but a fate. So I would deny the praise of Zizek that he takes a quote-unquote position, and also the implication that thereby he's political and thereby he's in the world without being of the world, and so on and so forth. I don't think that's a particularly healthy way to regard that, unless you're merely attempting to do this in venia verbo, or sort of ass kissing, if you would excuse the expression, just this sell of Zizek. He doesn't really need to be sold that way. We can take his position without the extra verbiage, let's say. Okay, so the second issue that I wanted to go to is the Heidegger issue, which is, I think it can be illustrated very rapidly, but nonetheless it's a point of possibly great wealth, inexhaustible wealth, is that Heidegger makes this move which is motivated by a specific kind of historicism which comes from Dilthey and from Count Paul York. And one of its elements is the claim that in generations, in the juxtaposition of generations, there is a moment which is important for the disclosure of being. Heidegger himself gives the example much later in life in his Sojourns book, a book favored by Jacques Derrida, where he juxtaposed on the Isle of Crete the moment when the commercial life came in, and which hold a line in his Bread and Wine poems speaks of, when he speaks of the thrones. When the thrones came into Crete, King Minos and Ariadne, and this honey for the gods and honey for Ariadne. When this came in, you see that luxury in some sense. As I've mentioned in the past, this image of the sparkle at the heart of the diamond. This is not to be understood here in this form of historicism as, say, our understanding of something that happened and then the thing that happened, or an attempt to correctly connect the word to the thing. But it's rather that if we can jump back to the idea of generation, generation isn't an idea. The people in the earlier generation, say in the 50s, they were different. Full stop. Right? To occur. They were different. They, for instance, people thought largely that they would get married very young, that the idea of living with somebody out of wedlock was scandalous, that what was to come later on in their life in the 60s was somehow alien to them and somehow seemed something that in their bones they couldn't stomach, and so forth. The generations, and then of course if we think of let's say Peter Fonda or so, or the 60s, the Easy Rider, whatever. If you think of life, the generations are different. So it's not a matter of somebody has some idea about it in their brain, in their psyche, in the soul which is doing all kinds of things, and then that corresponds to reality, and then it corresponds to some ontological God or something like that. But the beings of the one generation are different than the beings of the other generation. In the same way, the beings on the Isle of Crete, of the people who are enjoying this affluent way of life, who have all the appliances at their hands of the powerful, private assassins and gold thrones and whatever else it may be, their beings are different beings than the beings of the people who were once ordinary people. And then this split comes into the being. The very split, as a split, comes into being. So something along that line, if you see what I mean, rather than all these questions of how is the mental subject and its specific way of thinking about things, how are our ideas, etc., different from this person to that person, from this generation to that generation. Okay, so let's leave it there for the moment.